That's not a headline from the news. That's my life, my backyard, my lakefront home. The night it happened, the water was still, the air was heavy, and I swear I could hear their boots before I saw their faces. 2 guards, marching down my driveway like soldiers, sent by the board, sent to crush me. But what they didn't know is that I was ready, and what happened next, no one in this neighborhood will ever forget. Welcome back to HOA Chaos, where the rules are petty, the drama is real, and the stories will leave you shocked. My name is Daniel. I'm a father of 2, and I live in a quiet lakefront neighborhood that looks perfect from the outside. I work from home. I fish in the mornings. I built my own dock with my own hands. But in this community, perfection is only allowed if it belongs to the HOA. And that's how my battle with the board began. The night after the guards came, I couldn't sleep. The sound of their boots was still in my head, heavy, angry. Marching across my gravel driveway, I kept staring at the lake outside my window. The moon was shining on the water, calm, peaceful. But inside me, nothing was calm. I live on the edge of this neighborhood, a lakefront home that I worked years to afford. When I first moved here, I thought I found peace, a place to raise my kids, a place to breathe after long days of work. But peace in this community was never free. Here, the price of peace was control. HOA control. They call it the board. 5 neighbors with clipboards and fake smiles. 5 people who believe they own the lake, the streets, even the air we breathe. They tell us how tall the grass can be, what color the blinds must look like from outside, and where the kids can play. It sounds funny. Until you live here, then it feels like prison with white fences for a while. I stayed quiet. I paid the due. The guards didn't like my laugh. One of them stepped closer. He had wide shoulders, hands like stone. He said, "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." And in that moment, under the moonlight, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about grass length or mailbox paint. This was about control, about breaking me. But I wasn't about to bow, not that night, not ever. The lake stayed silent. The air stayed heavy. And there we were, me against the guards against my freedom, and the board, watching from the shadows, waiting to see if I would break. The guards didn't move at first. They just stood there, staring at me, waiting for me to blink. The moonlight cut across their faces, sharp and cold. One of them had a scar down his cheek. The other kept tapping his flashlight against his hand like he wanted me to flinch. But I didn't flinch. I leaned back against the railing of my dock. The wood creaked, but it held strong, just like me. "This is my land," I said quietly. "My house, my lakefront, my rules." They didn't like that. Scarface stepped forward, boots sinking into the dirt, shadow falling across my porch. He said, "You signed the covenant. You agreed to the rules." And maybe he was right. Maybe once upon a time. I had signed the papers without reading every word, but that was before I knew the truth. Before I knew what kind of people were hiding behind the title, Homeowners Association. I crossed my arms and stared at him. "You think I built this dock for you?" I asked. "You think I wake up every morning to please 5 neighbors with clipboards?" My voice echoed across the lake. Even the frogs went silent. The second guard finally spoke. His voice was deeper, calmer, but no less threatening. "The board wants this dock gone. You can take it down yourself, or we can remove it for you." He didn't say how, but the way he looked at me, I knew it wouldn't be gentle. For a moment, none of us moved. The air felt heavy, pressing on my chest, and then I heard a sound behind them, a car door, soft footsteps, and there she was, Mrs. Lang, the queen of the HOA. She didn't come close. She didn't need to. She just stood by the gravel road, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, watching, judging, waiting. Her eyes glittered like glass under the moon, cold, unblinking, patient. The guards glanced back at her. She gave the smallest nod, and that nod was all they needed. Scarface grabbed my arm. The other one stepped toward the dock. My dock. The place where my son caught his first fish. Where my daughter dangled her feet in the water during summer nights. They wanted to destroy it. To erase it like it never existed. I pulled back hard. The guard's grip slipped. He cursed under his breath. And that's when I realized something that made me smile. They weren't used to resistance. They were used to fear. Neighbors usually gave in before it got this far, but not me. I squared my shoulders and said, "Touch this dock, and you'll regret it." My voice didn't shake, not even a little. The guards froze. They weren't expecting me to fight back. Mrs. Lang's eyes narrowed. Her lips curved into something between a smirk and a sneer, and she said, loud enough for me to hear, "Make him crawl." The guards lunged again, this time harder, but the lakefront wasn't their friend. The dirt was loose. The boards of the dock were slick with dew. One slipped, crashed to his knees with a grunt. The other tried to hold him up, but stumbled forward and slammed his shoulder against the railing. The sound echoed across the water like thunder. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The dock did the work for me. And for a moment, it almost looked like they were bowing at my feet. Scarface cursed again, clutching his knee. The other one winced, holding his shoulder. Both of them were breathing heavy. And Mrs. Lang, she just stood there, face tight with fury. Her perfect little plan wasn't going as planned. "You see," I said softly, "this is my land, my dock, my freedom." The words tasted sweet in my mouth, sweeter than any victory I had ever known. The guards tried to stand, tried to gather whatever pride they had left. But their eyes told the truth. They weren't here to win. They were here to scare me. And they had failed. Mrs. Lang finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the gravel, sharp and steady. She stopped just a few feet from the dock. Her perfume drifted across the night air, sweet, but sharp, like poison wrapped in sugar. "You're making a mistake," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the anger boiling underneath. "You think this is over? It isn't." I leaned closer, close enough that she could see the defiance in my eyes. "Neither is my dock," I whispered. Her face twisted for just a second, just enough for me to see. The mask slip, and then she turned on her heel and walked back to her car. The guards limped after her, one holding his knee, the other clutching his shoulder. They looked like soldiers retreating from a battle they never thought they could lose. And me? I just stood there on my dock, the night air around me heavy with silence, the moon above me watching like an old friend, and for the first time in months, I felt free. But freedom is dangerous in this neighborhood, because the HOA doesn't forgive, they don't forget. And as I watched the red glow of Mrs. Lang's taillights fade into the night, I knew one thing. This war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, my mailbox was empty. No letters, no warnings, no fines, just silence. And silence, in this neighborhood, is never a good sign. Neighbors avoided my house like it was cursed. Kids stopped playing near the lake. And at night, I swore I saw shadows moving near the edge of my yard. Was it paranoia? Or was it the board? I didn't know, but I did know this. When power is challenged, it always comes back harder. The board had lost their first strike, and I had won, but I wasn't naive enough to think they would stop. No, they were planning something bigger, something worse, something that would make the guards look like child's play. And so, I prepared, I fixed the dock, made it stronger. I kept a light on outside my porch, and I waited for the next move in this game of control and defiance, because one thing was certain. The HOA wasn't finished with me, but here's what I want to know. If you were in my shoes, would you keep fighting until the very end, or would you tear down the dock yourself, just to buy peace? The silence didn't last long. Silence never does here. It's only the pause before the next strike, 2 days after the guards crawled away. I woke up to find a letter taped to my door, in my mailbox this time. Taped to the door, bold letters across the top. Final notice. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like it carried more than words. It carried a warning. The board claimed I owed thousands in fines. They said I had 30 days to pay, or face legal consequences. They threatened to place a lien on my home, the place I built for my family. The place I worked my whole life to afford, all because of a wooden dock on the lake. I stood there on my porch, staring at the paper, and I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how far they were willing to go. They weren't after money, they were after obedience. That evening, I walked into town, at the grocery store. I felt the eyes. Neighbors who used to smile now looked away. Some whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. One even shook her head as she walked past me. And that's when I realized. The board wasn't just fighting me with letters and guards. They were fighting me with whispers, with shame. Mrs. Lang was clever. She knew how to twist people, how to make me look like the villain in their eyes. I wasn't a man protecting his freedom. I was a troublemaker, a rule breaker, a danger to property value. The next morning, it got worse. My trash cans weren't emptied. The company said, billing error. But I knew better. By noon, a stranger's truck was parked across the street, windows tinted, engine off, just sitting there, watching, waiting. I went back inside. My kids were sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal. They asked why people were saying bad things about me, why their friends weren't allowed to come over anymore. I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your children that the place you thought was home has turned into a battlefield? That night, another knock on the door. This time not guards. A neighbor, Mr. Jacobs, from 3 houses down, an old man with a cane. Soft voice, tired eyes. He leaned against the porch rail and said quietly, "They won't stop. You know that, right?" I nodded. He sighed. "They tried the same thing on me, Vince. Mailbox height? Can you believe that? They fined me every week until I gave in." He looked at my dock, then at me. "Don't let them break you," he whispered. Then he walked away into the dark. His words stayed with me. Don't let them break you. But the board was trying. Every single day, the letters piled up, each one harsher than the last. They accused me of violating community trust. They accused me of lowering neighborhood value. They even accused me of threatening guards. When all I did was stand my ground, then came the meeting notice, a mandatory HOA hearing. With my name written across the top, the board wanted me to appear before them, to explain my behavior. I knew what it really was, a trial, the night of the meeting. The clubhouse lights glowed like a trap. Inside, rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to see me fall. At the front sat the board, 5 faces, 5 smiles that weren't really smiles. And in the middle, Mrs. Lang. She called my name. Her voice echoed through the room. I walked to the front. Every eye on me. My heart was heavy, but my steps were steady. They read the charges: unauthorized structure, repeated violations, disrespect toward security, failure to comply with community rules. Each word was like a stone thrown at me, but I didn't flinch when they finished. Mrs. Lang leaned forward. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" she asked, her voice sweet but sharp as glass. I looked at her. Then I looked at the neighbors, faces I had barbecued with, waved at, borrowed sugar from, now staring at me like I was on trial for a crime I didn't commit. "Yes," I said. I kept my voice calm. "This dock is mine. I built it with my hands. It's safe, it's strong, and it hurts no one. The only thing it threatens is your control." Gasps moved through the crowd. Whispers rose like wind through trees. Mrs. Lang's smile vanished. Her face tightened. "You're in violation," she snapped. "You will comply or face consequences." And that's when something unexpected happened. Mr. Jacobs stood up. His cane tapped against the floor as he pointed at the board. "This is nonsense," he said. "I've lived here 30 years, and I've watched you bully every family on this street. Now you send guards in the night. What's next?" The room erupted. Some neighbors agreed, nodding, murmuring. Others stayed silent, afraid. But for the first time, cracks were showing in the board's power. Mrs. Lang slammed her hand on the table. "Enough!" she shouted. The room fell silent. Her eyes locked on me. "You have 1 week to remove the dock, or we will remove it ourselves." Her words hung heavy in the air. 1 week, 7 days, a countdown to war. I left the clubhouse with eyes following me, some filled with pity, some with fear, some with quiet respect, and Mrs. Lang's eyes, burning with promise. a promise that this wasn't over. That night, I sat on my dock. The lake was calm, the stars reflected on the water. But inside me, a storm was rising. I thought about giving in, tearing it down, ending the fight. But then I thought about my kids, their laughter on this dock, their memories tied to this wood, and I knew I couldn't. 1 week, that's all I had, 7 days until they came for me again. The week after the meeting was the longest week of my life. Every sunrise felt like a countdown. Every sunset felt like a warning. I tried to live normal. I went to work. I fixed dinner for my kids. I walked the dog down the gravel road. But everywhere I went, I felt the eyes. Neighbors watching through curtains. Cars slowing down near my driveway. Whispers fading when I stepped closer. The board was winning the war of silence. They didn't need guards this time. They had fear. And fear spreads faster than fire. On the second day, I found another letter. This time not taped to my door, but nailed to the wooden post at the end of my driveway. A bright yellow paper with bold black letters. Notice of lien. They were moving. To take my home, not just my dock, my home. The paper claimed I owed unpaid fines. Thousands of dollars, more than I could ever pay. It said if I didn't comply, they had the right to file against my property. I held that paper in my hands, and I felt my chest tighten. Not because of money, but because of the truth it carried. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about destruction. By the third day, the neighbors stopped waving. By the fourth, even the kids on bikes wouldn't ride past my house. By the fifth, someone spray-painted the word "rule breaker" on my fence. The paint dripped like blood down the wood. I washed it off, but the word was still there, burned into my mind. I called the county office. I asked about the lien. The woman on the phone sighed. She told me she had seen this before. HOAs filing claim after claim, dragging people into court until they broke. Once they start this process, she said softly, they don't stop. Her words echoed long after I hung up. On the sixth day, another car showed up. This one wasn't tinted, it was police. 2 officers walked up my driveway, slow, steady, like they had all the time in the world. They said there had been complaints, noise at night, unsafe structure by the lake, suspicious activity on my property. I laughed bitterly. Suspicious activity? I asked. They didn't answer. They just handed me another notice and walked back to their cruiser. And then came the 7th day. The deadline. The sun set red that evening. The lake glowed like fire. I sat on my dock, waiting for the sound of boots again, waiting for the headlights of the board's cars, waiting for the fight they promised. But for hours, nothing. Silence, just the sound of crickets and water against the shore. And then, headlights. 3 cars pulled up to the end of my driveway. The doors opened. Out stepped the board, Mrs. Lang in front, dressed in black this time, not her usual bright colors. Behind her, the other 4 members, and in the shadows, I saw more men, not just guards this time, contractors, with tools, with ropes, with crowbars. They had come to tear down the dock. By force, I stood. The boards creaked beneath my boots. My hands tightened into fists. I felt the anger rising in my chest like fire. This was it, the final strike. Mrs. Lang called out across the yard, her voice carried sharp in the night. Last chance, she said. Take it down yourself, or watch it come down tonight. The men behind her shifted. One lit a cigarette. Another cracked his knuckles. They were ready to rip apart months of work, ready to erase the place where my family found peace. I stepped forward, just enough so my voice carried over the water. No. The crowd of neighbors had gathered by now, drawn by the sound, drawn by the spectacle, faces lit by headlights, some curious, some eager, some afraid. I could feel their judgment pressing down on me, but I didn't back away. I couldn't. Mrs. Lang's smile spread slowly. I warned you, she said. Her hand lifted, and the contractors stepped forward. But then, something happened. A sound behind me. The tap of a cane on wood, Mr. Jacobs. The old man from down the street. He walked onto the dock, slow but steady, and stood beside me. This dock isn't hurting anyone, he said. His voice cracked, but it carried. You can't just take a man's home away because you don't like how it looks. Murmurs spread through the crowd. One neighbor spoke up, then another, and another. voices rising in the night air, some against me, some for me. The neighborhood was splitting, right there in front of the lake. Mrs. Lang's face tightened. She hated losing control. She raised her hand again, but this time, the contractors hesitated. They glanced at each other, at the neighbors, at the growing tension in the air. One of them muttered, "This doesn't feel right." Another stepped back toward his truck. The board's perfect plan was cracking again, and I could see it in Mrs. Lang's eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break me, but she couldn't. Not tonight. The crowd kept murmuring, louder now. Some shouted, some argued, and in the middle of it all, the dock stood strong beneath my feet. Mrs. Lang lowered her hand. She turned without a word, and one by one, the board followed. The contractors climbed back into their trucks. Engines roared, headlights turned, and just like that, they were gone. The crowd slowly faded too. Neighbors walking back to their homes, some shaking their heads, some giving me quiet nods, some whispering words I couldn't hear. And me? I stayed on the dock. The lake was calm again, the stars above unbroken. But inside me, I knew this wasn't the end. The board had retreated, but they hadn't surrendered. They would come again, with lawyers, with papers, with tricks I couldn't even imagine. This was bigger than a dock now. This was war over freedom, and who had the right to control it? After that night, things went quiet again. Too quiet. No more guards, no more cars at the end of the driveway, no contractors with tools ready to tear my dock apart. But I knew better. Silence from the HOA was never peace. It was the sound of them sharpening new weapons. The first sign came in the mail. Not a yellow paper this time. Not even red. It was white, clean, professional, a thick envelope with a seal on the front. Inside, legal documents. Pages and pages of words I could barely understand, filed by the HOA's attorney. They weren't just fining me now. They were suing me. The papers claimed my dock was unsafe, that it lowered the value of surrounding properties, that it violated environmental guidelines. They listed codes, laws, rules I had never heard of, and at the bottom, in bold, they demanded not only removal of the dock, but payment for damages to the neighborhood. Damages for building something with my own hands on my own land. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, feeling the weight of every word. This wasn't a fight with guards anymore. This was a fight with lawyers, with courtrooms, with money I didn't have. My kids sat across from me. Strength to face whatever the board threw next, because I knew this wasn't the end. The lawsuit was just the beginning. The real war was still coming. The lawsuit dragged on. Weeks passed. Letters piled higher. My lawyer filed motions. They filed more. It felt like drowning in paper. But while they tried to bury me in court, I realized something important. I couldn't win by fighting the way they fought. Money, rules, lawyers, those were their weapons. I had to use something else, something they didn't expect, so I turned their rules against them. I went back to the covenant. The thick book of rules every homeowner gets when they move in. Most people toss it in a drawer and forget it. But I read it, every word, every line, and what I found was gold. The rules were endless. Grass height, mailbox color, holiday decorations, even the type of flowers you could plant in your yard. It was control dressed as community standards, and if they wanted compliance, then compliance was what they would get. The next morning, I started small. I repainted my mailbox, not once, not twice, but 5 times in 1 week. Each time, a shade slightly different than the approved color. Each time, I submitted a formal notice of repainting, exactly by the book. Then I mowed my lawn, measured every blade of grass with a ruler, wrote down the numbers, and mailed them in as compliance reports. Neighbors looked at me funny. Some laughed, some whispered, but slowly, they started catching on, because I wasn't just mocking the rules, I was exposing them. Within days, the board's office was flooded with paperwork, not just from me, from others. People started sending complaints about each other, about fences 1 inch too high, about driveways with 2 cars parked side by side instead of one behind the other, about porch lights left on after midnight. The board had unleashed these rules on us for years, but now, those same rules were eating them alive. Mrs. Lang didn't like it, not one bit. At the next meeting, she glared at me from across the room. Her voice shook with frustration. She said, "This community is falling apart because of people who don't respect the system." I smiled, because I knew the truth. It wasn't falling apart because of me. It was falling apart because of her rules. The lawsuit was still hanging over me. But now, the board was drowning too. They couldn't keep up with the flood of petty complaints. They couldn't ignore the chaos. And worst of all, they couldn't stop the whispers. Neighbors began to question, why were the rules so strict? Why were fines so high? Why did the board have so much power? The cracks in their empire were showing. One night, Mr. Jacobs came to my porch again. He leaned on his cane, looking tired but smiling. "You've started something," he said. I shook my head. "I just wanted to keep my dock." He chuckled softly. "Sometimes, revolutions start with small things." His words stayed with me. Revolution. Could it be? Could this petty war actually wake people up? But the board wasn't giving up. They doubled down, sent more lawyers, more letters. They even tried to fine me for harassing the board. Harassing. For following their own rules. The more they pushed, the more ridiculous they looked. And the more ridiculous they looked, the stronger I felt. Still, the pressure was heavy. Bills piled up, court dates loomed. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if it was worth it, if I was destroying my life just to save a dock. But then I'd walk outside, stand on that wood, feel the lake breeze on my face, and I knew. It wasn't just a dock, it was a line in the sand. The board wanted obedience. I wanted freedom, and freedom was worth the fight. By the end of the month, things were boiling. The neighborhood was divided. Some hated me, blamed me for the chaos. Others quietly supported me, too afraid to say it out loud, and some were simply waiting to see who would win. Mrs. Lang called another meeting. This one was different. My son asked if we would have to move. My daughter asked if she could still fish on the dock. I didn't have answers, and that hurt worse than the lawsuit itself. The next week, the whispers grew louder. At the store, I heard someone call me the lawsuit guy. At church, people avoided my pew. Even at work, a coworker asked if I was really being evicted. The board didn't have to win in court. They were already winning in public. One night, I found another note on my porch, not from the HOA, from a neighbor. No name, just one line written in shaky handwriting. "Stop fighting. You can't win." I crumpled it in my fist, but the words stayed in my mind. The board was clever. They weren't just fighting me with rules and lawyers. They were fighting me with fear. Fear of money, fear of shame, fear of losing everything. By the second week, the games got darker. Anonymous phone calls at night, the line would ring. And when I picked up, silence, then breathing, and then a click, over and over again. Every night, one morning, I walked outside and found dead fish scattered across my dock. Not one, not two, but dozens. Their bodies glistened in the sun, their eyes blank. Someone had thrown them there. A message, a warning. My kids saw, they cried. And in that moment, I almost broke. I wanted to tear the dock apart myself, burn it, end this nightmare before it swallowed us whole. But then, I looked at my children, and I remembered why I built it in the first place. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was family. It was freedom, and freedom is never free. So I called a lawyer, not a fancy one, not the kind the HOA had, just a local attorney who worked out of a small office downtown. She listened to my story, read the papers, and sighed. "They're trying to bury you," she said. "Not because of the dock, but because you stood up to them." I nodded. She looked me in the eyes. "You need to decide if you want it to fight this in court, because it won't be easy. Fight or fold. That was my choice. I thought about it for days. Nights felt longer. The lake seemed darker. Even the stars felt far away. But every time I stepped on that dock, I felt strength in my bones. I felt the wood beneath my feet hold me up, and I knew I couldn't give in. So I told my lawyer, "We fight." The first hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The board came dressed like royalty. Suits, polished shoes, folders stacked high with papers. Mrs. Lang smiled when she saw me walk in with my single folder and my tired lawyer. Her smile said, "This will be easy." They presented photos of my dock, letters I had ignored, claims that neighbors felt unsafe walking by my property. They painted me as a reckless man, selfish, dangerous. When it was my turn, I stood, my hands trembled, but my voice did not. I told the judge about my dock, about the nights I spent building it, about the memories my kids made there, about the guards who tried to drag me off my own land, and about the truth that this wasn't about safety, or value, or rules. This was about control. The judge listened, his face unreadable. When it was over, he said he would review the case and give a decision later. We walked out of that courtroom into the cold air. Mrs. Lang brushed past me. She whispered, low enough so only I could hear, "You're finished." Her words followed me home. Like a shadow I couldn't escape. That night, I sat on my dock. The lake was still, the air heavy, and for the first time, I wondered if she was right. Was I finished? But then I thought about something Mr. Jacobs had said, "Don't let them break you," and I realized, maybe I was already broken, but broken doesn't mean defeated. Sometimes broken things are the sharpest weapons. The next day, I walked the neighborhood. I looked people in the eye when they tried to look away. Some fought jabas, lynched, some turned red, and some, just some, nodded quietly, as if they were waiting for someone to stand, as if they were tired too. That gave me strength to keep fighting. It wasn't about me alone. It was about the whole neighborhood. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Neighbors argued openly now. Some demanded stricter rules. Others shouted that the rules were insane. Voices overlapped, hands waved, chairs scraped the floor, and in the middle of it all, Mrs. Lang sat stiff and silent, her control slipping through her fingers. When she finally stood, her face was red with anger. "This community is under attack," she said, her eyes cut straight to me, "by those who refuse to respect the system we built." I didn't move. I didn't speak. But everyone knew she meant me. Then something unexpected happened. A woman from the back of the room stood up. She was young, new to the neighborhood. She raised her hand and said, "Why do we even need all these rules? Isn't this supposed to be our home?" Murmurs spread. Another person spoke up, then another, and another. Questions filled the room. Why so many fines? Where did the money go? Who gave the board this much power? Mrs. Lang shouted for order. Her gavel slammed against the table, but the sound was drowned out by voices rising louder and louder. The room was no longer hers. For the first time, it belonged to the people. I walked out that night with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from hope. The board still had lawyers, still had money, still had the power of paperwork and threats. But now they were bleeding control, and once control slips, it's almost impossible to take back. I went home, sat on my dock, stared at the water glowing under the moon, and for the first time in months, I felt the shift. The war wasn't over, but the tide was turning. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, how far would Mrs. Lang go to take back what she lost? What line would she cross to break me once and for all? The weeks that followed were heavy. The board was bleeding control. Neighbors were questioning. The rules that ruled us all were now tearing the community apart. But power never dies quietly. And Mrs. Lang, she was not the kind to fade away in silence. The final strike came on a Tuesday morning. The lake was calm, the sky was clear, and a thick envelope waited in my mailbox. Inside was a court order. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was an eviction notice. The board had filed for foreclosure on my home, claiming unpaid fines, claiming I was endangering the neighborhood, claiming I no longer had the right to live in the place I had built my life. I stood there in the driveway, papers in my hand, neighbors watching from behind curtains. They wanted me gone. Not just my dock, not just my defiance. Me. That night, I sat on the dock, the wood cold beneath me, the water black and endless, and for the first time, I felt it. Fear, real fear, not for myself, but for my kids. For the home I might lose, for the memories that could be taken with a stamp of a judge's pen. I almost broke that night, almost. But then I remembered something, the cracks, the questions, the way the neighbors looked at the board now, suspicion in their eyes, doubt in their whispers. Mrs. Lang had overplayed her hand by going after my home. She had shown everyone what this fight was really about. Not safety, not property value, power. The next HOA meeting was packed. More people than I had ever seen crammed into that clubhouse. The air was hot with tension, voices buzzing like angry bees. Mrs. Lang sat at the front, smug, certain. Beside her were the other board members, silent, uneasy, in her hands. The foreclosure papers, she banged the gavel. "This man has left us no choice," she declared. Her finger pointed straight at me. "He refuses to comply. He refuses to respect this community. And now, he must face the consequences." Murmurs rippled through the room, some nodded, but many frowned, and then Mr. Jacob stood up again, his cane tapped against the floor like a drumbeat. "Consequences?" he said loudly. "For what? For building a dock? For standing on his own land?" The room stirred, people muttered, Mrs. Lang's face tightened. Jacobs wasn't done. "I've lived here longer than anyone, and I've watched this board fine families until they cried. I've watched them take money and never explain where it goes, and now they want to take a man's home? For what? So they can feel powerful?" The room erupted, voices shouted, some demanded answers, others demanded books be opened. "Where is the money going?" someone yelled. "Show us the accounts," shouted another. Mrs. Lang banged her gavel again and again, her voice shrill, or, "Dare! Order!" But the room wasn't hers anymore. It was ours. Then something happened that no one expected. One of the board members stood up, a tall man in a gray suit. Normally silent at every meeting, he cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "I can't do this anymore," he said. His eyes darted to Mrs. Lang, then to the crowd. "She told us to go after him, not for rules, not for safety, but because he embarrassed her." Gasps filled the room. My heart thumped in my chest. The truth was spilling out. She made us vote fines we didn't agree with. She took money from the fund without telling us, and now she's using this community like her personal army. The room exploded. Voices shouted louder. Neighbors demanded her resignation. Others demanded audits. The foundation of her power was cracking right in front of us. Mrs. Lang's face turned red. She screamed, shouted that it was lies. She pointed at me again. "He started this. He's destroying everything." But no one was listening anymore. For the first time, the board was outnumbered, outshouted, outpowered. That night, the meeting ended in chaos. No vote, no gavel, just noise. But in that noise, I heard something new. Freedom. The next week, the board collapsed. 3 members resigned. An emergency vote was called. Mrs. Lang stormed away, her power gone, and when the dust settled, the foreclosure order vanished with her. I kept my home. I kept my dock. But more than that, I kept something greater. I kept my freedom. The lake glowed brighter after that. The air felt lighter. Neighbors started waving again. Kids rode their bikes down my street, and for once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I still sit on my dock every night. I still feel the wood creak beneath my boots, and I still remember the nights of fear, the letters, the guards crawling away in the dirt. But now, I smile, because I know something the board never understood. You can write 1,000 rules. You can fine every blade of grass. You can send guards in the dark of night, but you can't break a person who refuses to crawl.